Okay. We are reading Last Stand at Papago Wells, Louis L'Amour. You have a whole bunch of people that have convened onto a water hole in the middle of the desert north of northern New Mexico. Some Indians are hombres, bad Indians are heading that direction, and right now just people are showing up. They're holding up there, and there are people that are looking for some of them. Some are running away from someone else, and there's fixing to be a showdown. Chapter 4. This is a short chapter. Sgt Timothy Sheehan called a halt in the bottom of a dry wash, and the men dropped to the sand right in their tracks. This is the guy that when they were I think they were the sheriff, and they were as a posse going after Lugo and Beaupre, I believe, for killing some kid in town, and then they got attacked, split up, and like that. That's who this guy is. Sgt Timothy Sheehan. Men dropped in the sand right in their tracks. Alone, he walked on a few paces and climbed to the lip of the wash and looked across the desert. Timothy Sheehan had come to the States as a boy of 10 and had gone to work at once. At 16, he joined the Army. At 42, he was a veteran soldier, leather hard and leather tough. 9 years of his service had been at desert outposts, and he knew the country well enough to fear it. An hour earlier, they had cut trail of a small party of Indians headed south, but he was not tracker enough to judge their number accurately. There had been at least 6, however, and he was positive they were not of the group who previously attacked them. And this tended to confirm his opinion that something was stirring along the border, and increased his anxiety to report at Yuma. He lay on the sand, grateful for even the brief respite from the endless plodding. His lips were cracked and his eyes red-rimmed, and he wanted to quit. He wanted to, but knew he could not and would not. He lay there, working out the course they would follow, hating the stale, sweaty smell of his unbathed body, of his dusty uniform, and the odor of horse and gunpowder that clung to him. Including himself, there were 6 men in the group, and they had just 3 horses. Until now, these had been utilized for transportation of extra rifles, ammunition, and canteens. Papago Wells lay at least 30 miles westward of the place where they had been attacked, and despite the long trek already behind them, it seemed almost a lifetime away. Stationed at Fort Yuma only a brief time, he knew little of this country west of Tucson. Water was the first consideration, but Bates' well was dry. Taylor, the last man of the sheriff's posse, told him there was another shallow tank called Cipriano Well, uncertain at best. Yet it was their only chance to get water enough to reach Papago Wells, the low hills on the horizon ahead of him, where the Agua Dulces and Cipriano Well was reported to lie among them. Actually, these so-called wells or tanks were merely catch basins for the runoff from infrequent rains, all highly unreliable. Sheehan knew the water they possessed now was barely sufficient to reach Cipriano. If that tank even existed, to reach Cipriano, if that tank even existed. There, if there was no water, they must draw lots for 3 men to take the horses and strike west for Papago. The sergeant knew the men were near the limit of exhaustion from heat, dehydration, and the long march, and he allowed them 30 minutes of rest. At his command, they got clumsily to their feet and moved out. "Keep it closed up," he said. "There's more Indians around." He let them march for 2 miles, then halted them. Conley, Webb, Zimmerman, mount up. Grinning and cracked lips at the stunned faces of the others, he added, "You'll get your turn. It'll be turn and turn about for the rest of the way." Taylor hesitated, seemed about to speak, then said nothing. One of the horses was his own, and he was subject to no orders, but whatever objection he might have had was stifled by realization that all were in it together. He was a short, stocky, taciturn man, hard-headed and self-righteous, one of the first to settle at Yuma Crossing after the army post was established and the ferry resumed. The sand in the middle of the wash was loose and deep, but that around the edges was mixed with rocks, was firm, and made for better walking. It would have been still easier out of the it made for better walking. It would have been still easier out of the wash, but they would have been visible for some distance, and Sheehan wanted to invite no trouble. Dust shifted over their faces in uniforms, but the men plodded on, sodden with weariness, caught up in an almost hypnotic stumbling walk whose very monotony dulled their realization of distance, heat, and dust. That sounds pretty miserable. As they walked, Sheehan tried to envisage the situation as it must be, for without doubt Cherupatai was gathering his forces and a serious outbreak was in prospect. Yet it was unlikely that more than 50 hostiles were in the area, and if they could be pinned down and destroyed, the outbreak would be over. His duty was obvious. He must return to Yuma and report to the commanding officer. Those poor devils caught out isolated ranches or mines were almost sure to be wiped out before help could reach them. If they were not already dead, the few who escaped might make a successful run for it to Yuma or Tucson. It was sundown when Sheehan's small command reached Cipriano Well. Taylor had scouted ahead, and as the soldiers drew near, he lifted a hand to stop them, then knelt and began to study the tracks. "They've been here, Sergeant, and they have a prisoner." Sheehan looked at the indicated tracks. Although merged by Indian tracks, they were obviously those of a woman, a white woman. Conley had gone on to the well, and now he returned. "There's water enough to fill our canteens and water the horses, that's all." "I'd say 5-6 Indians," Taylor indicated, "the stinking carcass of a mule. Stop here to butcher the mule and feed up." Let me say that one again. "I'd say 5-6 Indians," Taylor indicated, the stinking carcass of the mule. "Stop here to butcher the mule and feed up." That's where the girl escaped after they got the Indians got the mule, ate it, and went to sleep. Sheehan prowled restlessly. There was nothing they could do about that girl. Without enough horses, without food, and more ammunition, it would be foolish. "What do you make of this, Taylor?" For several minutes, Taylor studied the tracks indicated by Sheehan. Then he said, "Sergeant, that girl got away. She must have waited until they got their bellies full of mule meat, and when they dozed off, she walked away." "Couldn't she take a horse?" Conley asked. "They're afraid she spooked 'em, I guess, so she just walked off into the desert." The Indians had followed her. Unless she was crazy with luck, they would have recaptured her by now. Sheehan searched the desert using his glass, but the shimmering heat waves cut him off from the distance, and the desert told him nothing. Whatever had happened must have been hours ago. "Last night sometime," Taylor said. "She couldn't have gone far before they caught up." "Maybe." Sheehan studied the tracks. "She was moving right out, Taylor. Smart, too. Notice she didn't try to run? She knew it would kill her off too soon. I'd say she has a chance." He looked up. "All right, men. When the canteens are full, we move out." "Sarge," Conley suggested, "how's about 2-3 of us push in on a horseback? We might come up in time to save that girl." "No, we stick together." Sweat trickled down his face and neck. How far could a young girl walk in a night? He watched his small column form up, and then he moved them out. If that girl had only had sense enough to hole up somewhere and wait him out, she might still be safe. It was a mighty small chance, yet a chance. He started west, walking toward the setting sun. It would soon be dark, and the men were all in, or they should have been. Yet for the first time since the march began, they moved out as if eager to be going. Even big Zimmerman, sullen and hard-eyed, seemed anxious to be moving. Twice during the long night, he halted his men and allowed them an hour of sleep, and then moved them out again. There was little more than that human strength could endure. But he had his command to consider, as well as the girl. Despite the additional water they now had, he knew the sun took as much strength from his men as did the walking, and they needed distance behind them. Despite the brutal pace, nobody complained. Everyone understood that he was leading them in a struggle for survival. The sky was faintly gray, but the sun had not yet risen. When the first break came in their chain of bad luck. Emerging from a nest of scattered boulders, they saw, not many yards away, an Indian on a paint pony. He was sitting absolutely motionless, all his attention on something in the rocks ahead of him. At Sheehan's upthrown hand, the men stopped. Whatever it was, the Indian watched was further ahead in the same jumble of gigantic boulders, and as they watched, another Indian appeared, stalking something they could not see. Sheehan gestured for Conley, Webb, and Zimmerman to move toward the outer edge of the field of rocks, a point from which they would have outflanked the Indian on the pony. The rest he waved into position near him. He waited. If the Indians found the girl first, it would complicate matters. For if attacked, she would be instantly killed. Nevertheless, he wanted at least 2 Indians in plain sight before fire. The crashing volley cut short his command, and the Indian on the horse jerked from the impact of bullets and tumbled to the ground. Higher on the slope, the second Indian took 2 running steps, then pitched headlong into the sand, sliding a little way and smearing blood. Conley on the extreme right fired suddenly, then fired again. Sheehan hated to expose his men, but there was the girl to consider. "As skirmishers," he yelled, "yo-hoo!" They moved out on the double. There was a shot from the rocks that missed, and then the soldiers were weaving among the rocks. Zimmerman moved in, clubbed his rifle, and Stiles fired. From behind the rocks there was a rush of hooves and then silence. The soldiers moved on through the rocks. 3 Indians were riding away, one swaying in the saddle, obviously in bad shape. 3 Indians lay dead, and Sergeant Sheehan felt grim satisfaction at getting a little of their own back. Among the rocks, from a crevice that seemed too narrow to hold even a child, the girl stood up. She was very thin, and her flimsy dress blew in the wind, flapping around her childish figure. "I'm Junie Hatchett," she said, "and I'm most awful glad to see you." That was chapter 4. Love you, God bless.